Welcome to Money Isn't Everything. I'm Mary Wisniewski, Cornerstone Advisors Editor-at-Large. Every other Thursday, I sit down with someone shaking up financial services. We get into the how, the why, and the possibilities. In today's show, I'm chatting with Kelly Fryer, who is the Executive Director at the Fintech Sandbox, which is a nonprofit that gives entrepreneurs around the world access to data for free for a certain amount of time. We chat about what startups not on the coast face, how fintech startups are requesting climate data, and crucial traits of successful entrepreneurs. Here's our conversation.
Kelly, thanks so much for being on the show. Money Isn't Everything.
Thanks for having me, Mary. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited too, because I know we're just meeting today for the first time, but we do have one thing in common, and that is Midwestern roots. And
Yes.
So I thought we'd open up the conversation there because, I used to write for American Banker, and I did a story years ago at this point that explored the challenges fintech startups had from the Midwest in trying to secure funding. And I think you must have such an interesting vantage point here with the work that you do and where you're from. And I'm wondering, are we still, are those challenges still present? Did the pandemic that shook everyone around in a bit where they lived? What's happening right now with my favorite Midwestern startups?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, from the Midwest, born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. Love being from the Midwest. Now a transplant to the East Coast. But, I think startups not in one of the major U.S. startup cities can be a real challenge. It's not necessarily unique to the Midwest per se. Like you see it in the South, you see it in the Carolinas, Atlanta, other regions too. They're just smaller ecosystems, typically with fewer VCs based there, fewer corporates for partnerships, things like that. And so I think those startups and founders have to be really willing to spend regular time or be intentional about going to NYC or the Bay Area, especially as a fintech startup specifically, because there's a lot of relevant customers and funders that are just naturally going to be there. But that being said, there are a lot of great funds that are focusing on startups not based on the coast, which I love to see. I do think we're seeing an expansion of that. And there's also some strong institutions trying to support the Midwest. Like we have one partner, Global Atlantic Financial Group, and their commitment to the startup ecosystem, specifically in Iowa and Indiana, is really top of mind for them. For us as Fintech Sandbox, we have about 25% of our portfolio is actually based outside of the US altogether. So, UK, Norway, Brazil, Israel, very global in that sense because we're virtual. But in the Midwest specifically, we've onboarded some interesting startups recently. Like we had a company called InsurTech out of Iowa, which is a SaaS platform focused on risk insights for the insurance industry. Or we had a company out of Texas called Moonbeam that's focused on actually spend optimization for the military community, which is really interesting.
That's a perfect name.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And then Manifest out of Chicago, which is automating 401k transfers as people move kind of from employer to employer and automating that process. So just to call out a few, there's definitely activity in the Midwest, which is exciting to see, and hopefully they get more funding.
Yeah, well, I'm curious too, because I imagine you sort of, or in my experience, entrepreneurs like to focus on problems that they encounter. And so you have different kind of regional problems as well. I remember the startup I was profiling was working on homes that were under 100,000. And so they were running into people who are like, hey, is that possible? You know what I mean? So I'm curious, do you see the problems that they're solving? I know you just gave a few examples, but do you find patterns? Are there distinctions that you see geographically?
Not necessarily. I mean, I do think that outside of the coast, you do have more startups in situations like you just mentioned, where, again, we have an example of a startup out of West Virginia called Ridge Financial that's focused on personal finance for those in the Appalachian region. So we do see a little bit more of startups that are building specifically for problems or challenges that they face within rural communities or smaller towns. But overall, no, I tend to see just generally fintech entrepreneurs working on similar patterns or similar issues across no matter what their geography is.
Well, that just highlights that there are main problems that need
Yes,
a lot of attention to
there are
work on.
many.
Yeah, great many. And I think that's such an interesting thing about the FinTech Sandbox, this access to free data. And I know you've been around for a decade now, right? Or more
Yeah,
than a
it's our
decade.
10-year anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I imagine like the data sources have changed from start to now. And I'm wondering, how many data sources are available to entrepreneurs and, what kinds of data? Because I bet there's some really surprising kinds of data there.
Yeah, so we have over 41 data providers or data partners right now. Great folks like Morningstar and FactSet and Associated Press and Plaid and MSCI and others. And, when we first started FinTech Sandbox 10 years ago, it was heavily focused on capital markets data. So we saw a lot of startups focusing on data related to institutional investing, fundamentals within the capital markets. And we expanded into credit data, news data, personal finance, and like consumer transaction data. Lately getting into like ESG, real estate. So it's really any and all types of data. We have a fantastic guy on our team named David Savage, who's our data partner manager, and his job is focusing on making sure that we're adding in the right data partners to match the needs of the startups that are coming to us. So we're kind of constantly evolving the data providers that we partner with and that we offer, and always looking at like what are the new data sets we need to have available for this startup. So it's an always evolving kind of process.
You mentioned ESG, and I guess I have a real deep curiosity about like climate data and also like separately like health data. Are you seeing that come through? Are you seeing like the fintech merge more with those worlds a bit or sprinkling?
Yeah, especially. So
Mhm.
I would say, especially with climate data, at least we're getting a lot of interest and requests for it. Like we had an interesting request a few weeks ago around like energy data, from like a commodity standpoint, and also some risk, obviously ESG scores and various forms of those. The health data, I think there is a lot of interest in the financial sector, but there's so much issue with personal data and privacy that it's a lot more complex and difficult to get your hands on it. So I've talked to some like corporations who, whether they're an insurance company or a healthcare provider themselves or other things where they might have some of these metrics from their customers. But, as a public data set or a data set that an entrepreneur can easily get their hands on, it's much more challenging.
Oh my gosh, I know. Think of like the two hardest industries for like data and all the rules
and
around
regulation
it.
and privacy. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And
Coming
yet,
together.
I'm ready. I'm ready for the innovation. So
Exactly.
Kelly, this is my one segment that I call it. That's what you said. And this is something you said, or you told the financial revolutionists that I think, don't worry. Only some people should worry. But you illustrated this point so perfectly. You said, imagine being a bootstrap entrepreneur and you need to pay $200,000 or more just to get data to test your AI model or credit underwriting tool or personal finance app. That could easily be the difference between getting to your first sale and never getting off the ground. And I think that is so striking because it's showing like who would, do you want, I imagine you feel similarly to what you said, but is that true first off?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a sentiment that I believe very deeply. And I think it's a big reason why, FinTech Sandbox continues to be successful today with our data access residency. Talking about the high cost of these data sets, which again, if you're a FinTech entrepreneur, it's a bit unique that you need data sets in order to power your product for the most part. And as opposed to like if you're starting a shoe company or some other kind of app, you might not need it. And so I think that's why startups are so excited when they hear about FinTech Sandbox and what we're building, and why our mission, really remains the same over the last 10 years.
And, I imagine like the companies providing you or providing the entrepreneurs with free data, they want to see like, ooh, what interesting thing is going to be built. But like, what are their other motivations for wanting to supply data for free for, a limited time?
Yeah. So for the data partners, I'd say their motivations are a few things. So one is it's an early biz dev opportunity, right? You get to talk to an entrepreneur in their early days, maybe get them, enticed and hooked onto your data, and then they continue to grow, maybe become a unicorn. and that data and kind of commercial license agreement expands. We as Fintech Sandbox do not at all guarantee the commercial license agreement for the data providers, but that's one, is definitely a biz dev relationship. Two is what you mentioned before, is kind of innovative use cases. They can see how an emerging startup is using their data set and then repackage it as a product and sell it to hedge funds who are going to pay a lot of money for it, as opposed to the startup community. And then three is just general kind of deal flow, whether that's for like M&A or their own VC arm. We've had seen a couple companies go on to either get investments from data providers or get acquired by data providers.
And, you have such an interesting vantage point in being like, interacting with so many entrepreneurs. And I'm curious, I'm sure there's people who enter the ring that maybe we shouldn't have. I don't know. But I mean, some people have the right traits, and some people have like, oh, surprise, I didn't really expect this,
Yeah, that's fair.
Would you say, what are like, what's limited to 3? Or, pick your number. But like, I know there's probably a lot of traits, but what do you see that seems to be like, oh, this is, tons of startups fail, but at least with having these traits, it's setting them up in the right direction?
Yeah. So I think the key traits I find for a successful entrepreneur are like ability to take in feedback and make changes from that. I mean, I guess that or it's really kind of like listening, but I think being able to take in feedback and adapt to it is really, really key, because either you're listening to your customers, your investors, the market, like whatever it might be, and need to adapt and be able to easily pivot. Two is like a tenacity or call it hustle, like willingness to like pound the streets, pick up the phone, keep going as you're getting no's and not let that stop you. And then I think 3 is, I guess, like a resourcefulness, especially in the early days of, you have to kind of get creative of like, how can I test if this product's working or this feature is working quickly, cheaply, and use that as kind of a testing. And I think there needs to be a level of creativity and resourcefulness in order to do that. The other thing I'll say too is, like, there's the founders that I find, this traits I find successful for entrepreneurs, but then also looking across your entire founding team, and making sure that you are complementing each other, filling in gaps for one another. I think a great example, or what came to mind when you first said there's some people that maybe shouldn't get into entrepreneurship, is I've seen a lot of teams where it's like, okay, great, you're so technical, you're so deep in this, you get it, but I cannot picture you going out and selling this to, to an institutional investor or a big corporation, like, and making that pitch and being convincing. And so it's having somebody else on your team then, okay, who can take the lead on sales and can speak about the big vision of what this product is capable of, if you're highly technical and too deep in the weeds to be able to explain that to somebody else. So finding people to fill those gaps.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, I've heard of this, I've seen it firsthand, but I know some like hire acting coaches or, have a sort of stand-in is maybe the wrong word, but not completely on staff, but like to get the clutter out of the mind in front of a larger audience, let's say.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a great idea. Honestly, you have to be a bit self-aware of like where are my weaknesses, or again, if I'm not confident in doing pitching, or I'm not confident in the technical side, okay, who can I find that can do that for me, or how can I learn it as quickly as humanly possible?
Yeah. And I guess this opens up my thought process to think, because I always hear you hear different things at different times, but the clash of the traditional banker and the entrepreneur, and then, what happens when those entrepreneurs are acquired and have to they get paid a lot to work at a corporation for a set amount of time. And then it always seems like inevitably they go on to a llama farm or something after. So I'm wondering, do you hear those gripes from entrepreneurs who are then forced into the corporate structure? I'm using words that aren't right. They successfully join a corporation, but they're reluctant. Let's say they're reluctant.
Yeah. I don't think that's like a rumor by any means. I see that kind of time and time again of entrepreneurs who their startup gets acquired by a large institution. And then they go spend a certain amount of time working for that company. And I think it's a few different things. One, you've been your boss and your own boss and calling your own shots for so long that it's hard to kind of go back to that corporate structure. And I think the other thing too is, and again, what I was just saying before of like in startup land, it's being resourceful, it's moving quickly, it's testing things and pivoting versus in large institutions, it's slow and it's red tape and it's getting it approved by 8 different people before you can make the final decision and things like that. And I think that can be just mentally that is a really difficult pivot to make for a lot of entrepreneurs. So I see many who, do their time at the institution and then are using that also to, either noodle on a new idea for their next startup, or again, they take a break and go to their llama farm and then eventually go back into something else.
Go back to something else. Yeah, I do. We just had a guest on who had worked at the OCC while he was dreaming up a pot payment startup. So like, I really love using the like day job to see like, a real problem and then, trying to fix it in your off
I think
time.
you see that a lot in financial services, again, specifically, at least on like the B2B finance, like fintech products, where a lot of it comes from their own experience, working in a large institution or working on a specific desk or issue where they're like, okay, I did this for 10 years and we never figured it out. We never fixed it. So I'm going to go do my own startup that directly focuses on that issue. So I think you actually see that a lot in fintech entrepreneurs. I tend to find fintech entrepreneurs are a little bit older and have a little bit more kind of corporate experience under their belt, and they're building products based off of some of the things that maybe they saw at their day job that frustrated them.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, I'm also wondering, because this opens it up to a bigger dialogue on just like career pathing. And I've heard you say in your own can't really think about a 10-year plan because timing matters, right? So like, where's the opportunity? You can say, oh yeah, what I hear a lot of men often say like, I'm gonna blah blah blah, publish this novel by year 2, or build this thing that someone's going to acquire, whatever, the bold dreams. But I'm wondering from your perspective, like, how does one think about next step career, or how do you think about it? How have you thought about it in your life? And, how could that translate to advice for people trying to figure out their next step in financial services?
Yeah. I mean, yes, I do believe that. I think timing is a huge piece of your career. In the beginning, I get asked a lot by people in college or younger folks of how do you get your career started? I think in the beginning, that starts out a bit as honestly as happenstance. Where do you end up getting your first job out of college? Unless you're somebody who's super driven in a specific direction. I'm absolutely going to be an investment banker. I'm absolutely going to be a doctor. There's something with a very set career path. I think that's one thing, but otherwise, you kind of get your first job, which again, I feel like is a bit by luck and some, good setup in terms of your education. And then a career just kind of starts to unfold from there. And then you spend the rest of your time kind of figuring out, well, what do I like about this role? What don't I like about it? And then you kind of keep trying to move further away from the things you don't like with each new job and move
Try so
further
hard.
Move further into things that you do enjoy. It's really funny. When I did my MBA, they used to always talk about are you running from something or running to something, which I also think is a very interesting way to
I
think
love thinking about
career.
that. I think always running from.
away from something. I think most people, honestly, most people are running from something. I think you learn a lot more, or as you look for your next opportunity, you're much more focused on what you don't want to do than what you do want to do. And I think it's because of that I find that the timing is so is the key piece. As intentional as you can be of I'm going to do this in 2 years and then this in 5 years. It's okay, well, I did this in 2 years and then I realized I absolutely hated doing this. And then that changes what you're going to do in 5 years. So I think there's a big element to our careers that we really can't control. We can set ourselves up to some extent, but I think there is a lot of kind of timing and luck that also plays a role into it.
And am I remembering this right? Did you start off wanting to be, was it a director?
Oh, this is deep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not in movies. Yeah, I wanted to be a
Yes.
film producer. Yeah,
Yes.
that is real. And a
Okay,
screenwriter.
good.
Yes.
See, I love that because you clearly like broaden it up, but here you are, calling the shots for a bunch of people, helping them build their companies, which is,
Yeah. It's like
I
being a
think
director
those
in a
things
different
really,
way.
yeah, it's like being a director in a
Yeah.
different way. So I'm out of LA, so I feel it.
You get it. Yes.
Yeah. Hard tangent, but I'm curious
Okay.
because we have so many community bankers that we work with here, and I'm aware of some of the problems that they're up against. I shouldn't laugh. There are just so many. There's so many. It's hard to be a bank, but it's also hard to be a startup. But I'm wondering, like what do you think they need most help solving for right now, or what they most benefit from an entrepreneur standpoint? And we can change it from a community bank to any bank or credit union if that makes more sense. But what are the biggest
Yeah.
problems? Yeah.
I mean, I think like with community banks, the overarching theme is just digitization, kind
Yes.
of like taking outdated systems and interfaces and updating them to better compete and function in like such a tech forward world. I was actually speaking several months ago at a summit of community bank CEOs, and the CEOs were discussing kind of a number of their biggest concerns with running their community banks, and the biggest ones were concerns around technology. It's like how do we invest in technology and pick the right ones? Concerns around people internally, so like high labor costs, talent competition, retaining people. And then concerns around people externally, so like demographic shifts and the need for attracting younger customers and how to keep them. So, which to me, like those all three are kind of wrapped up in the same digitization, as in employees want to work for a forward-thinking company. Customers, especially younger ones, want to use bank products that meet them where they're at, which, these days means being fully mobile.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found it interesting kind of just listening in and hearing what their concerns were in those three spaces. The other thing that I think is kind of unique to and interesting to the community bank space is this like public assumption that bigger equals safer. And so you have those consumers that are, flocking to the big brand names that they recognize, which understandably so. And community banks trying to figure out ways to, again, combat that and figure out, okay, how do we attract more customers and make them think, okay, I'm here in your local community, local ecosystem. We are still just as safe and going to stay in business just the same way as some of the large tier one banks are going to. And I think that's a really big challenge for them.
It is a big challenge for them, and it like requires a really strong marketing message and probably to be really out there on social media, which I don't think is like that typical. No. So that's a recommendation. Be bolder on social media. I'm curious too, like how does the Fintech Sandbox find entrepreneurs? I mean, I know you're online, you do events and so on, but like, is it hard to recruit for just an awareness standpoint? Yeah.
I mean, I think marketing's everyone's challenge, right? There's never enough time and dollars that can go to that. For Fintech Sandbox, though, we're primarily, honestly, word of mouth, a lot driven. We have a lot of previous founders who have utilized our data access residency and then recommended it to other startup founders that they meet. We have data providers actually that meet startups who are interested in their products, and then they suggest that they get the data for free initially through Fintech Sandbox. And then we also have really great referrals from partners. So we work with a number of different accelerator programs like Mass Challenge or Village Capital or the Global Insurance Accelerator, and others who refer startups from their program to us and vice versa. So we kind of do this like cross deal flow, which is really nice.
Yeah.
And same with our VC network. They'll often refer startups that they've recently met to us. We'll refer startups that might be interesting for their portfolio to them, and kind of other great ecosystem and community partners who are deeply involved in the fintech or startup ecosystem, like Rise, created by Barclays in New York, who can like give us referrals or mention us to companies that might be a good fit for our program.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, there are a lot of entrepreneurs. It's just a matter of collecting them.
Yeah, it's a matter of exactly uncover. So it's a little bit, I think, too, doing, we've done a little bit as well, like a geography or like community engagement approach of like, okay, who are our key contacts in London or in Chicago or in Atlanta, and try almost like having them find who are the up and coming startups in the ecosystem and then referring them to us, which is nice.
That's so cool. Well, Kelly, I have one last question for you, but before I do, I want to open it up to you. Have, anything you want people to know? I know Boston FinTech Week is on the horizon, but yeah, let listeners know where to find you or what you want to focus in on in the next couple of months.
Absolutely. That's very, very kind of you. So you can find the Fintech Sandbox team on our website, fintechsandbox.org, including the application for our startup to the data access residency. If you're interested in getting free data access, we accept applications on a rolling basis. And then, like you mentioned, we hope to see everyone in the fall at Boston FinTech Week. This is our 7th year celebrating the fintech community in the company's hometown of Boston. So the event, Boston FinTech Week, is October 14th through the 18th. And our 2-day ticketed conference, the Fintech Sandbox Innovation Forum, will be October 16th to 17th. We're really excited this year. We're focusing on, we call it FinTech at full throttle as our theme.
Ooh.
So kind of just, exactly, right? Can't you just picture
what's going to happen?
The rapid pace of change going on in technology and our industry and around the world. So we'll have some really incredible headline speakers that you won't see anywhere else, as well as some great community events throughout the week. So you can get your tickets on bostonfintechweek.org right now.
Awesome. And Kelly, last question. What's the photo on your phone's lock screen or image?
Oh, that is, it is a picture of the ceiling of the Arc de Triomphe.
Oh, cool.
In Paris.
Yeah. Okay. That's a cool one. That one's a cool one.
Yeah, it's very cool. So it's kind of like, it looks almost like a little like concrete, like flowers sort of, like very structural, but with like decorative flowers. And so that's what's on the lock screen these days.
Well, it sounds pretty. Well, Kelly, thanks so much for being on the show. It was lovely. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you so much, Mary. This is such a fun conversation. Thanks for having me.
So the biggest thing I've learned in today's conversation is that 10-year plans, well, they're kind of silly. Timing is everything, as they say. And surprise! There's a 2-for-1 coming in 2 Thursdays from now. You'll be able to get the next episode of Money Isn't Everything, where I sit down with John Thompson from H&R Spruce, and we talk about what society gets wrong about income volatility and interesting mobile banking features. And also on August 22nd at 10 a.m. Pacific, you can catch the Cornerstone and Fritch webinar, where I'm sitting down with Fritch founder to discuss Gen Z and all things money, based on a kind of fun, vibrant report we did. See you then.